using hashtag SaveOurCities. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2018 National Urban League Annual Conference, Plenary 4, Ctrl-Alt-Delete, Shutting Down Tech's Racial Gap. Welcome to the stage, Chairman and CEO, BCT Partners, Dr. Randal Pinkett.
What's up, Urban League? What's up, Urban Leaguers? Did you have a good lunch? All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming out to this panel. Thank you for coming out to the conference. Welcome to Columbus, Ohio, and welcome to the National Urban League National Convention. This forum this afternoon is entitled Control-Alt-Delete. Anybody remember Control-Alt-Delete when their computer wasn't working? Okay, that's like the savior. Control-Alt-Delete is going to save you. And the subtitle, Shutting Down Tech's Racial Gap. So currently, there are numerous articles describing the great disparity in racial representation across the tech industry, and especially in Silicon Valley. Some of you are aware of this, you've read the headlines. But for all the talking that's been going on for so long, not much has been changing. Not much at all, at least not for the better. For example, in an article written in USA Today by Jessica Gunn back in October, the headline read the following: Silicon Valley's racial gap is getting worse, not better, new research shows. That was the title. In her article, she goes on to show how African American representation has significantly declined over the past few years across the tech sector. Here's a quote that really sums up the gravity of today's situation. It says the following: despite pledges from technology companies to crack the minority ceiling, Silicon Valley has a race problem, and it's getting worse. In a more recent report published by Brookings University in May of this year, their headline and research echoed what we found in USA Today. Their title says the following: Black and Hispanic underrepresentation in tech. It's time to change the equation. They wrote the following, their words, not mine. In some instances, the diversity picture is getting bleaker. Black representation in C&M, that's computing and mathematics, black representation in C&M occupations is moving in the wrong direction, slipping from 8.1% of the field in 2002 to 7.9% in 2016. While tech companies across our nation have over and over said that they must do better, blacks and Hispanics still remain underrepresented in tech jobs by nearly 50%. 50%. I could quote several more studies, but you get the point. The results would largely remain the same. We're not on the field in tech, nor are we getting a fair opportunity to be on the field and play on the field in tech. The more that we're shut out, the greater the disparity will be in our economic mobility, our upward economic mobility, as global employment opportunities increase exponentially in the tech sector. And lacking skills and exposure, we will continue to be left behind. So as you can see, we have a lot to talk about this afternoon with our illustrious panel of tech professionals and thought leaders who will endeavor to help formulate some tangible, actionable solutions to this problem. So let's get right into it. Let's get into the discussion and bring our panelists forward one by one, from my right to the left, your left to the right. First, let's bring out Brandon Andrews, co-founder of Gauge and consultant for ABC Shark Tank. Please welcome Brandon. Next up, we've got Angel Rich, founder and CEO, I love this name, of the Wealth Factory. I want the Wealth Factory. Show your love for Angel. Next is Tiffany Dena Loftin. You know her as the National Director of the Youth and College Division for the NAACP. Next up is Ruben Harris, CEO of Career Karma and co-founder of Breaking Into Startups. Give him a round of applause. Next up is Allison Jones, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Code 2040. Show your love. And last but not least is Will Lucas, founder and CEO at CREADIO, Creative Radio, and co-founder and CEO at Clasana. Round of applause for Will. All right, please take your seats, panelists. Let's jump in. So let's jump right into the conversation. You heard the numbers. You guys are all in, around, or connected to the tech sector. So you see the problem firsthand from your lived experiences and your professional experiences. So what is your opinion? What are your respective opinions on what's causing this divide in tech? Now, we all know it's a multifaceted problem. Give us some insight to the facets. Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I'll start. Hi, everyone. I think we've noticed sort of two things that are constantly coming up. The first is folks in tech treating equity and inclusion as like sort of a one, just out of the box, looking for a one out of the box solution, right? So not willing to invest in understanding the totality of the issue. So folks will say, okay, we're just gonna hire some interns and be done with it, when it's actually about the culture, the processes, how are people recruited and retained throughout the company. So an unwillingness to look at the issue from multiple angles, I think, is a big part of it. And the other thing we've noticed, honestly, especially now, is fear. Right, so talking about race in general is challenging enough, but we live in a climate where, you know, folks standing up and saying, gosh, you know, this is a problem in this company or this issue, they face a lot of backlash, not just externally, but internally. So we've heard stories of folks saying, you know, I wanted to start this conversation at work and, you know, my colleagues were not supportive of me. They, you know, targeted me. They treated me unfairly just from wanting to raise your hand and say, I think we should address this issue. So we have this sort of environment now where it's actually a lot harder, not that it's ever been easy, but folks actually being afraid to address this issue.
Please.
I also think there is, unfortunately, a misalignment in terms of the motivation for this. I think people think that diversity in tech and supporting diverse entrepreneurs is simply the good moral thing to do, but there's a strong economic imperative that's there. When a venture capitalist decides to invest in a startup company, they are, in essence, picking the products, services, the content that consumers will be consuming, the products and services, the products that'll be on store shelves, things that'll be on Amazon. They're picking those things 5 to 10 years in advance. And so if companies want to keep pace in terms of speaking to diverse consumers, as our nation continues to get more diverse, they have to be investing in startup companies with diverse founders, with diverse teams, and that means that we have to have a pipeline of diverse technical experts, diverse people working in these companies. There's a strong economic imperative that's there, and I think too often we get caught up in the moral reasons, which are very salient. However, if you're a company, and especially if you are a general partner at a venture capital firm and you have a fiduciary responsibility to your limited partners, if you're a publicly traded company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your stockholders, and you're not investing in diversity, then you're putting that company at risk for the future.
So my background is global market research, and there's a term in international marketing called self-reference criterion. And as a researcher, I like to try to look at things objectively. And what self-reference criterion means is typically when you enter into another country or culture, you have to let yourself let go of everything that you've previously learned. You have to allow yourself to know that when in Rome, you have to do things according to how the Romans do it. And I think oftentimes because the makeup of the traditional investor does not come from our community, they do not necessarily know how to relate to our community. So they are looking at different criterion and metrics and measurements that they would normally use for their community, but not necessarily taking the time to step into Rome and understand how to apply those metrics in our community in diversity and inclusion. And I believe that presents a lot of barriers as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. So again, Tiffany, Dena, Loftin. I'm the new National Director for Youth and College at the NAACP. New as in I started in February of this year. And I think about this question in a different way because of my constituency and the folks that I work with on an everyday basis. We have over 550 high school, middle school, and elementary school chapters across the country for the NAACP Youth and College Division. Yesterday, matter of fact, I got here this morning, which is why my voice sounds this way, and I'm drinking tea, so forgive me. I spoke to over 450 students yesterday and trained them in really grassroots organizing, preparing them for the midterm elections, and then past the midterm elections with the next 5 years of the census, the presidential election, redistricting, and then a possible constitutional convention. And when we talk to these students, we also have to find out what are their individual interests. And just because they do like social justice organizing does not mean that they're political science majors. They go across the spectrum. And so I think about this work in terms of pipelines, and one of the biggest pipelines is our educational system. We think about HBCUs, they're only 3% of the colleges and universities right now in this country. But at HBCUs, there's 27% of those black students who are majoring in STEM. So the investment has to start where we can find them, and we have to meet them where they're at, and that's on the campus, starting there. 2, when I talk to these students and I talk to these young folks, they want good paying jobs. Like, sometimes they really have a passion and they have it figured out when they're in college, but most students don't know what they want to be when they grow up. They don't know what their career is going to be. They just know that because their parents told them, because of the communities that they come from, because their income background, that they have to find a job that is going to support them. And right now, union jobs ain't really the biggest option for students who are coming out of college. And so when they're looking for these opportunities, they're saying, how do I find paid internships? How do I find good corporations that I can work for, where I can build a ladder of hierarchy, where I can get a better job later on, not just a part-time job now, and now that's not gonna help me with credible experiences or talents or skills that can transfer to other jobs that I'm gonna get later. They want that now. And there's not a lot of opportunities for them when you ask that question. The second piece is also that, like, 83% of executives right now of tech, or 83% of tech executives right now are white people. So there's a cultural aspect of it that we've already talked about just a little bit, and I'll probably talk about it a little later as well, because the work that we do in the NAACP Youth and College Division with the movement of social justice organizing and education, it always includes a layer of the culture. Our culture is really important to how we recruit and meet people where they're at, and finding people that look like them, not only in the classroom, but in the work that they want to see, is also extremely crucial. And then the last thing I'll say is, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but there's a huge pay gap right now between people of color and white folks who have tech jobs. And if we're not going to be able to handle those discussions yet, we can't expect them, our young people of color, to be successful in these spaces. So we have to think about all of the pipeline ways that we can enter, and my expertise and the work that I get to do for the last almost 10 years, I'm 29, so relax, the last 10 years is student movement organizing and young people organizing, and their perspective is, what is the best job that I'm going to get and how can it prepare me? Even if I'm majoring in STEM, what are the opportunities that are there for me, and are they safe for me to attend?
So no, good points. I want to get you in, Ruben. I want to get you in too, Will. But I want to go a little deeper on this question about representation. Tiffany, with some great points. You sound great. You
Thank you.
Sound fantastic. And you all look great on HDTV. You can't see it, but I can see it. But you look great on HDTV. But the thing I need you to help me out with, Ruben and Will, is if I look at the trend for tech jobs, they're increasing exponentially. If I look at our representation, we're not even holding our ground. We're losing ground. So give me some insight. I know you're doing work with startups. I'm sure you're seeing this at the front lines. Give me some insight on that.
Yeah, I think if you rely on a tops-down approach to get people jobs in tech when most jobs are offline and come through referral, you're not going to change anything, because the CEOs, the investors, the different people that are involved went to certain schools and grew up in different communities, so the people that they hire from are people that they know. So that's first. Going back to the education piece that Tiffany brought up, if you look at 80% of underestimated students or underrepresented students that are majoring in computer science, I think pretty much all of them don't complete the degree. And so that's another issue. And if you think about education in general, people are starting to move towards lifelong learning. I mean, student loans are at an all-time high. People aren't aware of the roles that exist within tech. And even when they know about the roles that are in tech and that they want to get those skills, they don't know where to go in order to get them. And then once they have the skills, since they don't have the people that look like them, they can't get the referrals to get in there, and they don't even know what to do to prepare to get those jobs. The other thing that I think is very important to understand is that companies understand the importance of investing in their people, and they'll pay their engineers to learn more skills. But if you look at the contract workers that are working within these companies, that are the janitors, security guards, the dishwashers, the child caregivers, over 50% of them are black and brown. And they technically have their foot in the door. and you can provide alternative forms of education for them to learn. And even though our unemployment rate is very low right now, you think about the gig economy, most of them are in temporary jobs, right? And so if you're able to level these people up that technically have their foot in the door, you could easily move the numbers up, because the numbers are like, I'm talking about like 30 black engineers in a 70,000 person company, and there's $1.2 billion that have been spent over the last 5 years in tech, but most of the time it's going towards corporate events of people that already know about tech. It's other black professionals. And if you think about, I say this a lot, but if you think about spreading the gospel, you want to have the room full of people that don't know the gospel already. So we got to actually like go down to our communities, and then there's a lot of entities like NAACP, this National Urban League, and things like your organization, where we're all working on solutions to the same problem, but we're not working together. And if we can bucket ourselves into different groups of people that are working on the same things, and then come up with a strategy to measurably increase not just skill development, but also employment, you can do a lot of things. And I think it starts with awareness, which is why we started Breaking Startups, to demystify what's going on in the tech world, point people to teaching programs for the jobs that they want. And with Career Karma, we're giving that to the support system, not just before and during the training programs, but for the rest of their life.
All right, go ahead, Will.
I feel like we as African Americans have always known that we have not fought a fair fight. So at the same time, we have to hold the big tech companies of the world responsible. We also have to focus on starting companies that employ people. There was a study that came out by the Small Business Administration a couple of years ago that said 60% of all African American companies are in the bottom 20 categories for sales revenue. 60%. And so, and I applaud you if you own a barbershop. I applaud you if you do lawn care. But we have to think differently about starting barbershops and think differently about starting lawn care companies. Instead of, there's a Borix on every corner several years ago. There's Supercuts everywhere. So instead of just starting, Will's Barbershop, how do I get 50 Will's Barbershops? But we're not training each other enough to think about how we do things at scale so we can employ people. There has never been a movement, at least I struggle to think of one, to where us just knocking on the door breaks down walls for us, but creating our own and saying, you know what, if you won't let me play baseball in your major league, I'm gonna start the Negro League. And then once I start the Negro League and you see that I can fit, you see that I can do this, then the doors of opportunity open to us. So we have to start looking inward first and think about this as entrepreneurs. How do we start companies that employ our people? How do we start companies? And then secondarily, on the investment side, there's enough money in this room to fund Ruben's startup. There's enough money in this room to fund these people's startups. So when we think about how do we get beyond the border of the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world, I'm not asking nobody for nothing. I'm starting my own, and I'm going to employ my people.
Let me get a quick show of hands on how many entrepreneurs do we have here in the room? Just stand up so we can see you, just so we can just give a shout to our entrepreneur. Okay, all right. So Brandon, you made an interesting point in your opening remarks about the business case. I'm going to use my language, the business case for diversity and inclusion. It's not just the nice thing to do, it's the business thing to do. So how do we get more push, particularly in Silicon Valley, for seeing that business case and them seeing it as a real imperative and not something that's charitable? How do we get there?
I think the unfortunate thing is that very often large companies do not make significant changes until there is a crisis, until Pepsi comes out with their Kendall Jenner ad, which was obviously not only irrelevant culturally, it was offensive.
Or until Starbucks wows out. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Or H&M.
And I think it's going to take, and Dove, Kellogg's, we can go down the list of brands that have made these significant cultural mistakes that make you wonder, who are they talking to? Or are they talking to anybody? And I think, unfortunately, it's going to take more brands, one, making significant mistakes with their ad campaigns, with their products and services, getting dragged on Twitter, having, unfortunately, Color of Change, NAACP, and others running campaigns against them because of the mistakes that they've blatantly made. I think it's going to take that before we see wholesale change, because, unfortunately, People and brands are run by people very often, don't make significant changes until there's some kind of consequence that's there. And so I think you're going to, one, see a lot of brands missing it culturally in terms of the products, services, content that they produce. But two, I think you're going to see, unfortunately, some brands missing revenue projections because they're not coming out with products, services, and content that speak directly to diverse audiences, that speak to not where the country used to be demographically, not where the country is today demographically, but where the country is going demographically. You all want products and services that are culturally relevant. These brands aren't going to be able to deliver them if they're not doing acquisitions of startup companies from diverse founders, if they don't have diverse workers working in their companies to help create a culture that speaks to a more diverse nation and a more diverse world, and they're not going to be able to reap the gains from the investments that they've made if, again, their products and services aren't more diverse. And so I think it's going to take, unfortunately, brands losing market share, brands taking hits, getting drugged on Twitter. It's going to take campaigns being run against them before they really start to move, because they know the demographic changes that are happening. They know where the country's going, and they know they need culturally relevant products and services, but they're choosing, by not diversifying their pipeline, by not investing in diverse founders, to not be prepared for those changes.
Yeah, I agree with everything he just said. I just wanted to give an example of one of our people that was at United Negro College Fund that's now at Adobe that did something that was really special. Her name is CREADIO Moore. She recognized that colleges are graduating about 50,000 computer science graduates every year, and coding boot camps are graduating about half. And so what Adobe started doing is something called Adobe Digital Academy, where they essentially identified people that are going through these coding boot camps. They paid for the coding boot camp. They gave them a stipend. They also gave them housing, gave them an apprenticeship after, and then hired them at the end. And now they're starting to do that at scale. And I think because there's millions of jobs that are open, because there's not enough people that are employed for these roles, and the U.S. is going to be majority minority, I think it already is a majority minority, you're going to have to invest into diversity, whether you want to or not. And I think examples like that, Salesforce doing things with like Trailhead that's training a bunch of people online, are going to continue to pop up. But I think apprenticeships and internships are going to be very key going forward. But I think colleges themselves are going to have to adapt, and even our religious institutions that we're talking about, where traditional education can't keep up with the pace of technology. And if you aren't just having online courses but aren't adapting to these short-form 3-month programs that are available, not just for entry-level jobs, but also mid and senior-level jobs, so people can switch careers, you're not going to be able to adapt, and our education system will either be severely impacted or go away, except for maybe healthcare positions, which aren't kind of insulated from automation. So I think that, I think the educators, there was another question that somebody brought up around, how do teachers know what to teach? And I think it's important for us to explore examples of online and offline things that are short form, that are adaptable, to point our people to. And I learned about podcasts through Will. He interviewed me on his podcast a long time ago before I had anything. And then I started learning about these programs, and now we're all working together.
I want to, I'll just make this quick. The business case for diversity is interesting, has been made over and over again, like that data point. I think McKinsey came out with a really great study a few years ago about, companies that are diverse outperform their competitors by 33% or some really incredible number, and yet we are not seeing any change, right? And I think the issue of external pressure, which I think you were talking about a bit of companies needing to mess up in some royal way and then feeling sort of public outrage, forcing them to change, I think is definitely important. I also think, and this is something we've seen at Code 2040, is it also takes folks within those companies really agitating for change at all levels, right? And so what we've seen, for example, is members of our community launching lawsuits and winning them, right? Forcing leadership to resign and cleaning house and really rebuilding a company from the ground up. We've also seen folks completely overhaul how they hire, right? So not saying, okay, we need to hire more people, but we need to hurry up and get people in the door, and then just sort of ignoring diversity outright, but saying we are not going to move forward with this hiring process until we completely overhaul it and make sure that our entire pool of folks is representative of the communities that we're trying to reach out to, right? And so this range of activism within companies, I think, is also really important. And the way that we get there is, of course, equipping people with sort of the language and the tools they need, but also highlighting examples and creating community around folks who want to take action internally. I think we want to operate from a place of there's nobody coming to save us, right? And when I say us, I mean, yes, Black folks, and I mean our allies and our accomplices in this work. This idea that something's going to happen from outside is part of it, and it also requires us saying, okay, what's my sphere of influence? Where am I sitting in terms of this conversation around racial equity? What aspect of it can I own, can I take a part of, to ensure that whatever I'm doing, I'm actually creating space for other Black folks to be at this table?
You know,
Tiffany.
Really fast, because everybody's in this range of how do we hold them accountable, and I really like what Brandon said, and I really like what you said. There's hit them, and I'm an organizer, so I always think, how do we hit them where the money is, right? They don't change unless they have to. And the only reason they're gonna have to change is because you're messing with their money. Sorry, I was cussing a lot yesterday, so I just had to hold myself back. So there's the money angle, and then there's also folks from the inside out, which I agree with as well. But the last piece that I'll add to that list is, right now there is a long legacy of Supreme Court cases, not only on the federal but also on the district level, that have to do with affirmative action. And I don't believe that we can actually enforce cultural change unless you hold people accountable. And in order to hold people accountable, sometimes you have to put policy in place. So when we talk about the range of activism that takes place, it's not just the pipeline of young folks and the numbers that are coming in and the cultural change. It's not just how do we run campaigns on people who are doing, wild things that are racist. It's not just how do we hold people accountable from the inside out so that people on the inside can do the work, but it's also legislative. We have to think about, and I always bring it back to elections because that's my baby. I love elections and voting. So we got to make sure, especially right now in the midterm elections, that we are voting people in office that are going to be responsible and accountable to the people and hold people's interests and who know their own communities. Because right now you've got folks who are paid for, can I be honest, by some of these people we're talking about, and they're endorsing their campaigns and running their races, and then they're accountable to them and not to the people who need to get jobs at those places. Does that make sense? So we need to make sure that we're holding those people accountable as well, and they're not the heads of those corporations or these tech companies are not the only people we need to hold accountable.
And Angela, I want you to get in next. But before you get in, I know from your work that you saw in a financial corporation the genesis of a real emphasis on African Americans in terms of how they saw that as a market. Like they saw the business case, and it was your data, your analytics that really helped them to see that opportunity. So if you could touch on that, in addition to what you were already going to say, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, I actually was going to be humble. I wasn't even about to talk about myself.
Well, I'm going to shout you out.
Okay.
I'm going to shout you out.
Okay, I'll tell that one really quickly first. When I first arrived at Prudential, they had me working on the women's study, Asian American study, Hispanic study, and all these other studies. And it had been my goal since I was a child to get an African American financial study done. And so little did I know this had never been done in the financial services industry before, and this was in 2009. Well, I started interviewing the different heads of the organization, and they told me that Black people didn't speak a different language, so there was no need for an African American study. I refused to accept that as an answer, and this is actually what I was about to talk about, but I wasn't about to talk about myself. I give a speech where I say people need to be Trojan horses. I have an even more radical view on this. Yes, you could say we're not going to move forward unless we overhaul it. I want you to take a step further. I want you to daggone near get fired because you're trying to support your Black community. I want you to pretty much put your job on the line because that's how hard you're going for your community. When I was at Prudential, I don't even think I've ever said this publicly before, but I'm far removed from them now. They actually tried to put me on a system that was called managing out while I was at Prudential in the midst of me doing the African American study. And I was racing against the clock. My last day at the headquarters of Prudential, before I went off to Connecticut was literally the day after we launched the African American study at CNN in New York. I refused to not get that study done. I did not care what it took and almost lost my job as a result of it. Thank God I had a really good friend that was the CFO of the organization, and he was like, I'm getting you out of here and I'm sending you to Connecticut. That next day, coincidentally, they also fired the head of market research, who was extremely racist. So on both ends, you need to put your job on the line, and you need to be working on the inside to weed out whoever is there that needs to get out. Both of those things caused me a lot of enemies with the inside of Prudential, but you would not have Black people in life insurance commercials right now if it was not for me doing that.
Thank you.
Wow, wow.
And then the second person I'm going to talk about, that was what I was about to talk about. But while I'm there, Get History of the Black Dollar is out there. That's based off of the African American research work. Now, who I was about to talk about is even more gangster, okay? This girl name is Rachel Spivey. Shout out to you, Rachel. Yes, I'm about to talk about you. I'm talking to my camera that's on my phone. Rachel... this is actually public information that's in Fortune, and I've never talked about it before because it was private information before. Rachel is a gangster. When Trayvon Martin got shot, Rachel was working out in Google, and they were doing some funny things with her as well because she was a Black woman. But she wasn't having it. She was like, heck, whatever. She called NWA, Ice Cube, and brought them into Google and hosted a diversity panel. You heard of this? Mm-hmm. And hosted a diversity panel at Google and was like, enough is enough. Y'all have to start supporting diversity. And then after the panel, she walked outside and like almost like the entire company, or at least that office, came around and gave her a hug. It's a big picture that's in Fortune magazine where Rachel was in the middle of it and the whole company is giving her a hug. Do y'all know shortly after that, they put her in charge of diversity, and she now has an annual $10 million budget to go around the country giving out money for diversity?
Where's Rachel?
That's how you do that.
Where's Rachel? You said she's here?
She's actually in D.C. right now.
She's in
because
D.C. You looked out, I thought she was here. Okay.
She's
cool.
no, she's not here, but y'all should. I can introduce you, but yeah.
10 million, you're saying.
But yeah, we went to college together, yeah.
Excellent. So I want to shift the conversation to looking at what the National Urban League is doing. You guys are obviously supporters of the Urban League, and they've been working for decades now to ensure diversity and inclusion, but how would you advise the National Urban League, and in fact, advise those that are here in the audience of what we can do to improve opportunities for our people? What can we do?
First of all, hold on. Right now, do y'all realize that we are having this conference, Netroots is having their conference, and the National Association of Black Journalists is having their conference as well? So to answer this question really quickly, the first shout out to National Urban League is even having an entire convention conference dedicated to these conversations, because Black spaces have not done that yet. There has been no Black space that has dedicated its entire programming to this conversation, and I think that's the first step, which is absolutely phenomenal. Shout out to them. Some people will have workshops and webinars and some Twitter town halls, but the entire agenda is how do we fix all of this? So shout out to the National Urban League for that work and for starting the conversation in that way so that we can change our frame of reference moving forward. And for me, our students are starting school this month. Gosh, it's already August. It's about to be Christmas, and then it's 2019. So anyway.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, basically. Happy New Year, everyone. So, and so not before elections. We got to do it through elections first. And so I think about how we change our frame of reference before school starts for a lot of our people, and how we continue to have these dialogues and conversations. But I just wanted to say shout out to the Urban League for doing that, one. And then the second answer I'll give is the way that we increase that work is figuring out how do we start to connect our base of people to the folks who are doing the work at the top, right? How do we better bring in our people and have an open door policy for people who want to come in and ask questions and get information? And you like that?
Hashtag open door policy.
Hashtag open door policy.
I like it a lot.
That's really long.
I like it.
Tech people would tell me probably, okay. So I think that's really long, but that's a good one. How do they have an open door policy where now it's not just the
ODP.
National Urban League with good job, with the people who are the advocates, because like someone said earlier, I think you said it, we're preaching to the choir almost, talk to people who don't know the gospel yet. But how does Google and Facebook and everybody else and Twitter have discussions where they bring us in? That's right. That might be a little bit radical. but bring us in. Maybe we can go to the headquarters and have a discussion back and forth on how we want to implement these changes too, right? And then bring our people who are unable to afford to come to spaces like this, because a lot of us can afford to come to spaces like this, but I know a lot of people who can't. And then we have those people pay for those people to come. Shout out to my girl Janae Ingram, who works at Airbnb, but she's able to do that, right? Connect. We need to have more connectors who do that work for people who are actually in the field, people who actually live at home. Y'all might be surprised, but I got members and people in the NAACP who don't have access to internet. They don't have an iPad. They for sure ain't got no computer. Their only resources might be at their school, right? And they don't have computer literacy. So we have to think about how do we bring those people who are who are open to these opportunities to be able to go meet with these larger organizations or corporations.
And jump right in, but I got to see some more activity on social media, folks. I'm looking at the hashtag Save Our Cities, and I don't see a whole lot from this panel. So to the point on getting invited into the social media conversation, get out your phones, get out your tablets. I know we got folks here with some hashtags and some handles, so let me see some activity on the social media front.
One thing on activity before we
Save
before we
Our
move
Cities
forward.
is the hashtag.
So here's something I'm going to do. Here in just 1 minute, I am going to post a Twitter poll for all of you on Twitter. I'll use the hashtag Save Our Cities. But one of the first things that you learn as an entrepreneur is that you need to connect with your customers, have a conversation with them, and do what they tell you to do. Right now, you all in the audience are our customers, so I want to know what you want to hear. I'm going to ask you guys a question on Twitter. What do you think is the best way to fix the tech diversity issue? It's going to be at I'll pin to the top of my profile at Brandon Talk. I'll use hashtag Save Our Cities so you'll see it. The poll will be open for a couple minutes. We'll continue to respond up here, and then in a couple minutes we'll come back with the poll results to make sure people have an opportunity to engage.
Again, focus right now. No, that's shout out to that. Again, the focus is what can we do. So
I struggle with heavily keeping, and I think it is a worthy conversation, but I struggle with heavily keeping the conversation on beating down the doors of big tech companies. Only because I think at the same time we do that, we have to focus on believing that we can create these companies too. So I created a podcast a couple of years ago called the Of 10 Podcast. You can, in iTunes, personal shout out. But I had an advisor to my startup come to me, he's a white guy, and he said, what would it take to get more of African American kids in the inner city interested in technology? And I said, they need to see a black Mark Zuckerberg, somebody who looks like them and is seeing some success. But then I kicked myself.
Angel Rich.
But then I kicked myself and I said, after that conversation, wait a minute. We have super successful black people in technology. We just don't know who they are. And so I created this podcast called the Of 10 Podcast. It was only supposed to be 10 episodes, 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10, obviously Of 10 Podcasts, right? So at the end of that first season, I had people on there, black executive from Snapchat, Facebook, black executive who started their own companies. At the end of the season, I had Twitter on fire saying, fantastic, when's the next season? And I'm like, there's only one season here. But what I found was there was such a thirst for our stories. And there were parents emailing me and said, I didn't know that we were out here in the tech community. Thank you. I listened to this with my son. I listened to this with my daughter. And now they're inspired to do this themselves. And so we need to see the Angel Riches of the world. We need to see these stories to give our kids the inspiration that, look, you can start this thing. 1 in 5 white children are using Instagram regularly per day. 1 in 3 black kids are using it constantly all day. However, and I hate to give out statistics on stage, but this is necessary. Less than 30% of our schools, less than our high schools, have advanced math classes. More than 60% of white schools have advanced math classes. They are being taught to create products that we consume. But we're not sharing the stories of, look, Billy, there is somebody on the other side of Snapchat building this thing. We're not doing that enough with our kids. So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I say this, we believe to invest in bad ideas. And here's what I mean by that. When I sit with my daughter and we watch Shark Tank, and she comes to me with business ideas, I invest in her bad ideas because she needs to know that, look, entrepreneurship is a real thing. When she comes to me and tries to sell me her little art designs, and I'm like, look, that's not good. You didn't put enough work into that. I'm not buying that. You got to put more effort into this. You have to listen to me, the consumer. So go back and do some more work. Don't come to me with half of the page is all white and you didn't even try to color on that. Put in some work. She needs to know that there is a consumer demand for great products that I want. I'm not just going to buy something because you made it. You got to put in the work. But our children need to know that there's an opportunity on the other side of that app. There's an opportunity on the other side of that company. They have to be shown these stories. So it's important that we we listen to things like Ruben's podcast where you see alternative people from alternative industries coming into technology. It's important that you listen to podcasts like mine, of 10 Podcasts, iTunes, Google Store, SoundCloud, to where you see people who look like you creating companies. Paul Judd, 26 patents. Jewel Burks, just part pick, sold to Amazon. Her technology is in the Amazon app on your phone. We don't know these stories. We need to know these stories, and our kids need to see these stories of brown people who look like them creating millions of dollars for their family. Right. We talk about legacy, that's how you create legacy.
Right. Wakanda is real. Wakanda is real. Come on now.
And speaking of like people supporting each other, he mentioned Jewel Burks. Jewel Burks just invested in my company. So it's like really cool like how people are supporting each other. But I would say like when it comes to job creation, I definitely agree with that. But too many people don't know the game and don't like work in the system to understand what system that they're in and what game they're playing, which piece they are on the board and how the piece moves. I personally don't believe in like asking for permission or waiting for people to like get what I need to do like whenever it comes to this space. So I actually like the hashtag Let's Break In. Every single job I've gotten in tech was created for me and it came through somebody else. And so going back to what we can do, this might be controversial, I'm kind of tired of a bunch of events where we just talk about the same thing every year and there's no follow-up. And it's just over and over the same conversation and no action items to follow up on. So I think we need to start setting action items that we execute on and then be like, okay, last year at the Urban League, we talked about these action items, and then this is how we executed on it. This is what didn't work.
And so what do you say we should execute on then? What is your perspective on that?
I think that we need to identify the people within the Urban League that want to break into tech and then give them the support in order to do that and connect with the different people in the ecosystem and then set a goal to get there. Okay. And I'm happy to help people do that.
All right, anybody in here looking to break into tech? Raise your hand if you're looking to break into tech. Okay. So we need every single person with their hand up to come and connect with somebody on this panel, and let's make some connections right now. Let that be at least one action item that will take away from today's panel.
Absolutely.
I have something to oh yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit more. So like, I definitely think that's something that we should do as well. And then as far as like investments and things like that, to his point, like being aware of who invested into these different companies, I think is very important, not just from a venture capital perspective, but from an individual angel perspective, because these people are going to be future board members of your companies, and your board can actually fire you from your own company. And if you don't choose those people properly, then you're going to have a lot of issues. So anyway, I just think that that's something that we could do, is just like, let's talk more action, measurably increasing people.
No, that's good. So just to check in real quick, what I'm hearing right now is I'm hearing an argument for people being fighters at the front lines inside their organizations and being willing to risk their jobs to have that progress made. I'm hearing the argument for more of our own black-owned businesses, more of our entrepreneurs. We had some folks in the room who are already in the game, because we're not going to just rely on tech companies to solve this problem. In fact, they're not going to solve the problem. For us to solve it, we have to own more of our own technology company, which means, to your point, we need to have more examples that people can see.
And if I don't mean to cut you off, I apologize.
Go ahead.
Brandon and I were talking
Just keep
about,
it brief, that's
yes,
all.
I will. I promise I will. I promise I will.
I
promise. But Brandon and I were talking about something backstage. You remember a couple years ago, right before Obama left office, there was an act, I don't know if it was an act or whatever, a piece of legislation to where you don't no longer have to be an accredited investor above a certain amount of money to invest. The Jobs Act, to invest in companies. There were, out of the 100 or so people in this room, maybe 10 of you said you were interested in tech. Well, the rest of you can invest in tech, and you don't have to have $500,000 a year or $1 million a year worth of personal net worth. So what I advise is find your little cousin who's building apps on the side and invest in him. I advise you to talk to Ruben. I advise you to talk to those other people in this audience who are trying to build companies and find deals, find things to invest in, find how VCs
you said brief.
Can I
One
say
second,
one more
I
thing?
promise this will be brief. I just want to add a little bit. I just want to add, that was brief.
That wasn't
You're
brief.
talking about legislation.
I'm the
That was-
moderator.
That
Go
was
ahead,
brief
man.
for
You got it.
legislation. The National Urban League has been an incredible partner to Values Partnerships, our firm. As I'm sure many of you know, we run a nationwide casting tour for ABC Shark Tank, focused on finding more diverse ideas and more diverse voices, more diverse entrepreneurs, getting them in the pipeline for the show. The National Urban League has an incredible resource in cities all around the country. They're called Urban League Entrepreneurship Centers. And so these entrepreneurship centers work with local small business owners. They also do some tech programming. If folks in that area are interested, my brother here who runs the Houston, stand up, brother, and give him a round of applause, who does the Houston Urban League Entrepreneurship Center. He hosted us. We hosted a casting call in his space. We try to go where the entrepreneurs are versus having them come to a big convention center, et cetera. We want to go to the community. So we could take Ruben's idea to connect with folks in tech, create a Google form like we were talking about earlier. We can take your idea to get people interested and involved in equity crowdfunding and connect with Urban League Entrepreneurship Centers all around the country and host a series of conversations where we bring people in and talk about tech, talk about how to get tech skills, but then also partner with some of these equity crowdfunding platforms. And again, with equity crowdfunding, anyone in the United States over 18 can invest as little as $10 in startup companies pre-IPO, before they're listed on the stock market. And that's where most of the market value is created.
It's where
when you have
legacy
a
is
new
built
company.
and wealth.
Exactly. So we could schedule Urban League at Urban League Entrepreneurship Centers all around the country, equity crowdfunding night / tech skills night, have a couple of crowdfunding platforms sponsor it, potentially have some sponsors from this event sponsor it, and I think that could be an incredible, tangible next step that we take, and something that we could come back next year and talk about wherever the National Urban League Conference will be next year.
All right. No, good comments. So I want to get you back into the conversation, Allison, and I want to shift the conversation. We've talked about what the Urban League is doing. We've got some good examples. And now let's look at what each of you are doing. I'm going to give you all just a little bit of airtime to talk about what you're doing in your organizations and or what you're seeing out in the marketplace that's working. And so you're with Code
2040.
Code 2040,
Yes.
which is an
Yes.
interesting, provocative name. Maybe
Yeah.
you could share more about what is Code 2040 and what's the work you're doing to address the gap.
Absolutely. So Code 2040 is a nonprofit based in San Francisco. We are finding and connecting and mobilizing a large community of racial equity advocates in tech who are going to work to desegregate the innovation economy, right? And so what that means is we work at the intersection of two big shifts in our country right now. We get our name from the fact that 2040 is the beginning of the decade when the United States will become majority people of color, particularly Black and Latinx folks, right? And so as we become majority, what does it mean for us to not have representation in the institutions that govern our lives, right? And that sort of leads to the second big shift that we're seeing, which is the role of tech in our lives. And I think, when we talk about, we obviously know, for example, that most companies are tech companies, even if they're not based in Silicon Valley, right? Like, tech is sort of influencing everything. And in a way that really is transforming how we all interact with information, money, and power, right? So what that means is access to tech is not just about, of course, we want folks to have access to really great jobs and opportunities, but access to tech is actually access to power. When we're having conversations around the role of Facebook in our elections, when we're talking about the role of facial recognition software and policing, when we're talking about these things, we're really talking about how tech is shaping how we live every single day. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, what does it mean for us to have not just have a seat at the table, but to really participate in the building of these products so that they don't hurt us, so that they don't, really wreck our lives in reckless ways. And so what we do is we work with folks throughout the industry, with many partners in Silicon Valley, Portland, Oregon, and New York City, actually, to work with them on saying, what does it look like to really build that groundswell of folks in companies who are actually pushing against certain policies, raising their hands to hire differently, recruit differently, build different products, and build community among them so that they don't feel isolated and afraid, because that's actually a big theme that's been coming up lately. So quite a bit of work that we're doing really within these tech companies, given the work that we've been doing over the past few years.
Excellent.
Yeah, so
Shout it out.
So for us, we recognize that there is no job security anymore. and the half-life to any skill is about 1 to 2 years. So what's most important is for you to learn how you learn. And a lot of times you learn that from other people and not just school. And the school is still very important, and there's going to be a massive labor shift over the next few years. Millions of jobs are being created and destroyed. It's going to be applicable, again, not just for entry-level jobs, but also for mid and senior-level jobs. And so what we recognize is that even though we want to help everybody, and a lot of these training programs, diversity programs, are optimizing for people from Ivy League schools. I mean, I know this is going to also sound controversial, but like if you think about Wakanda, right? Wakanda, they know about vibranium. Think about vibranium like tech skills. But most of the world outside of Wakanda that's also black people is unaware of these tech skills, and they kind of are hiding in plain sight, not sharing it with everybody. But we can actually share it with our people, and you can like do all kinds of amazing things with that power. Going back to what you were talking about, access to power. And so what we realize is that instead of focusing on the people that are these 1% professionals that are already going to get jobs on their own because they, for some reason, are like the kind of like athletes, we focus on the 99%, which is actually where the power is. And rather than like addressing everybody immediately, we're starting with people that want to become software engineers. So once we understand who you are, what your learning style is, what your challenges are, what your goals are, we don't just match you with the right training program, but we group you into peer circles of 3 to 7 people like you that are doing the same things. And then we'll match you with someone or a group one step above you to help you get there. And when people ask about what the cost, we say there is no cost. The only cost is when you get to that level above you, you help somebody behind you. And that's the karma piece. And then while we're doing all of this stuff, we recognize people outside of tech don't read tech news, which is why we created Breaking Startups, so that you are aware of what's going on in the tech world. You're aware of entrepreneurs. You're aware of VCs. You're aware of how the game is played. And then that helps you with psychological motivation, because even if I show you the path, it's just like trying to get a six-pack. Everybody knows what you got to do. But it's not just going to the gym every day. It's hard. You got to be consistent. You know, sometimes it's easier to do it with a buddy. It's very psychological, and it's not just our podcast. It's all kinds of content. It's important for you to understand about. It's going to push you through and help you get to the next level.
No, so I want to get Tiffany in real quick, and I'm going to hit you, Will, because it did not get lost on me that you're here with the NAACP supporting the National Urban League. Had a long history of the two organizations working together, but nonetheless, great to see that you're here on a conversation also talking about this issue. So what is the NAACP doing, and what successes have you seen in that work, and what challenges have you seen in that work?
Thank you. And I also didn't say this in the beginning, but I did share it on my social media page, and I'm just glad to be here, especially
We're
in
glad
this
to have
new
you
role.
here.
Yeah, thank you. Just in this new role, in this new capacity, I think that outsiders, whoever they may be, think that there's drama in between the big civil rights organizations that do this work, and it's real, and I've addressed it multiple times. We just need to come together, and I'm new, so if you got beef with me, let's talk about it after the panel.
If the Jabari tribe can come back to Wakanda, we can all work together. Are you with me? We can all work together.
How do I feel about being Michael? Okay, whatever. Okay, and so, and it's funny because you've been talking all day about superheroes and Wakanda and Black Panther, so we'll finish rapping about that later. So the way that we're coming into this work, and I can specifically lead on the youth and college role, right, is that we are in a very unique position. I'm in a very unique position where my responsibility is to make sure that our students and our young people across the country, and it's not just NAACP chapters. When I went to UC Santa Cruz, which is a historically white university in Northern California, we didn't have an NAACP chapter at my school, but we had the African Black Student Coalition, we had the Black Student Union, we had the Black Sisters United, we had the Black Men's Alliance, we got all these black. But we didn't have NAACP. And there's a whole culture of schools that do not have NAACP chapters, but have very robust, active, radical, fantastic, strong Black student leaders. And so my job is to make sure that those two things come together and that we're finding and giving opportunities to those young people that otherwise do not have that access, right? So talking about Wakanda and the people who are Black who don't live in Wakanda, like since I'm in this now I'm using it and it sounds weird, but now that I'm in Wakanda, I gotta use the people who are not in Wakanda, right, to make sure that they know what's going on. And I do that by either hiring those people to come and do that work, which I've already done. We hire people who are interns to come and do that work. There are a plethora of folks that we just asked to be volunteers for our national convention that just happened in San Antonio, Texas, 3 weeks ago. And those folks aren't NAACP members, but they're BSU leaders, and so we bring them into the space. Nice. In that same practice, which we're already doing, we have to continue to do it in this way in the tech world, right? Mm-hmm. So that it's not just my students who think that, oh, I have to be a social justice leader to be a part of the NAACP. It's like, no, actually, theater arts, STEM, health, research. I don't care what your journalism. I don't care what your passion is. There's a place for it, and we're going to help you navigate, right, how to be able to connect that to future careers. And me and Ruben were talking backstage about how we're going to do that after this, which is great, right?
About to go
So
down.
we're going to, I'm looking at him for confirmation because he just told me we're going to do it.
Definitely doing it.
So now I got witnesses.
You got
He said
witnesses.
we're going to do this work
We
together.
absolutely gonna do it.
So I just
Word.
need one person to tweet that they're going to work together and double down with
We tweeted.
Save Our Cities hashtag and a Wakanda Forever hashtag. Somebody
Facts.
tweet that for me, please.
You could also say Killmonger and Nakia were right, but I prefer more like Nakia approach, and it says a lot about the power of black women. So anyway, it's another conversation.
Look at you.
Power to the people. Go ahead, Will.
So I'll start here. There are two things that made the biggest impact on my life. One is awareness and mentorship. So I'll tell you a really quick story, and I can do all this in the space of about a minute. Don't kick me off here. I grew up in Toledo, 2 hours north of here. Shout out, hey, Toledo
Shout out
here.
to Toledo.
Hey,
So we forget that most of our country does not look like Silicon Valley or New York.
Right.
And so what happened to me was I grew up where General Motors and Jeep were the jobs you wanted. And it wasn't until I moved to Atlanta in my early 20s that I saw young black men highly successful, and they had nothing to do with music, nothing to do with sports, and they weren't selling drugs. So when I saw that that success was real and not just on TV, it pulled something up out of me that says, look, they are out here doing it outside of what I'm seeing on my day-to-day. And so it's gonna sound like I'm bragging just for a second, but I'm not. I'm getting to a point. So I'm commissioner on the Casino Control Commission here in Ohio, one of the youngest commissioners ever appointed here in the state of Ohio to any commission. I'm a University of Toledo Board of Trustee member, the youngest trustee ever appointed to the University of Toledo Board of Trustees, and I chair the MLK Commission for the state of Ohio. All those things, here's what's the most important thing to me out of all of those seats. The University of Toledo Board of Trustees, when I graduated from the University of Toledo, there was no person who looked like me on that stage sitting there to shake my hand. So I make sure I'm still relevant. You know, I collect Jordans, and I invest, so don't yell at me. But so when those kids see me walking on campus, and I say kids now, but when those students see me walking on campus and they look like me, and they see he's a trustee, that is the most important thing to me, that they see somebody in their 30s. I ain't too far from them, and they can be sitting in that robe on graduation day, that they can be sitting in that seat. So the most important thing that I'm doing is being a representation, and not only that, is shining a light on people who are also doing the work across the country so that they can see that it's possible, and that's what we do with the podcast and the work we do outside of our own local geography.
All right, I want to get maybe one more comment in, and then I want the audience to get ready. We're going to go out to you. We got mics situated out there next to you. We're going to invite you to ask questions of the panel, so get ready. If you want to line up now, you're more than welcome to. Anybody else want to add before we go to the audience?
So at the Wealth Factory, our mission is to provide equal access to everyone, everywhere. We design financial literacy, education, technology games. Our games walk people from birth to retirement in 12 interactive modules. The first main game that we have on the market is called Credit Stacker. It's similar to Candy Crush, but instead of swapping around candy, you swap around credit types to pay off your debt, achieve a high credit score, and learn from the multiple choice questions. It's been named the best financial literacy product in the country by the White House, Department of Education, JP Morgan Chase, top 10 app in the world by Google, #1 in 14 countries on Apple, and top 5 in 40 countries.
Don't clap. Pull out your phone and download it right now.
Exactly. So that's actually exactly what I was about to say. You know, and speaking to your point, you know, we come together and we collaborate, and as I've been saying all day to different people that I meet, our game is free. So why, you know, if you have an organization out here, please feel free to integrate our game into your program. Now, you can contact us, and we have curriculum that, like I said, is the best in the country and has been adopted into the Department of Education. And we will happily charge you for that, and, you know, and integrate it into the school systems and everything like that. You know, but at a minimum, my goal, my passion before I die is to create equal access to financial literacy everywhere. Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I feel that way about financial injustice. And so we have to spread it all across the world, and that's why at a minimum we made the game free. I'm happy to now be a global icon with the United Nations. We're building financial literacy ecosystems. I just got named Commissioner of Financial Literacy in DC, and I plan to use the full brim of that hat. Okay?
Hey.
So if you're interested in any way possible in financial literacy, workforce development, economic development, please email our team at info@getwealthylife.com. Again, that is info@getwealthylife.com. We will get back to you within 48 hours, and even if it's through the free game or contract, please connect with us. Get History of the Black Dollar. I'm selling them right out there. They're $25. They're also on Amazon.com. And download Credit Stacker.
All right, we're going to the audience. We'll go to the lady here on my left to your right with the first question.
Yes, hi. My name is TJ Johnson. I'm the president of Trabian Enterprises. We're an information technology solutions company here in Columbus, Ohio. So I make up 1% of president, CEO, and IT. So it's tough out there. So I believe knowledge is power. So I kind of want to share a little bit of our struggle because I'm on the front lines of IT as well. African Americans always fight to break down the walls and break through the glass ceiling. In Columbus, Ohio, our legislation passed a bill that mandated that 15% of government contracts should go to minorities. Well, the problem with that is our black legislators worked with the governor to get that passed, and African Americans aren't benefiting from it. Everyone else, women, Indians, are benefiting from the 15%. So my question, or more of a knowledge point, is this. When we're fighting the doors down for access, we have to stay focused on making sure that our fight is for black people and African Americans, and not just for minorities as a whole. Oh.
Yeah.
Face the mic? Okay. So that was my first point, and I'm going to share something with you very briefly about the racial gap, and this is really disheartening. So when we submit, it's a consulting company, so we submit staffing as part of one of our divisions.
Staff augmentation.
Staff aug, thank you. So we were working with a major corporation. We presented 2 African American candidates, 2 Indian candidates, and 2 white candidates. We lost out. The African American candidates were booted immediately. The white candidates were booted secondary. I went back and I said, why did our candidates get booted? One of the Indians that happened to interview was honest and shared with me. He said it was a panel interview and they were all Indians. They only, number one, want to hire their own. I said, well, then why didn't any of you get the job? They said, we were from the South, not the North. They said, TJ, what you need to do is go find somebody from the North, submit them, and they'll get the job. I said, well, email me the countries in India that are North. He did. I put my team on it. We submitted candidates that were from North India, and we got the placements. When you're talking about shutting down the tech racial gap, it's far deep. It's way below anything we could even imagine. We're chipping at the crust here, but it goes far deeper. I thank you so much for breaking the concrete and opening up and exposing it, but talk to people who own IT companies and consultants that are actually in the trenches. It's an ugly picture.
Yeah, so I actually happen to be the author, yes. I happen to be the author of the Financial Empowerment Urban Youth Study as well. It was actually one of the first research reports in the country on the racial wealth gap. My research report came out 1 week before Maxine Waters, and she actually invited me to her office and welcomed me into her office, but technically mine came out first. And so I'm very well versed on this subject. I was also on the very first Diversifying Tech Council caucus at the Congressional Black Caucus with Jesse Jackson. So this is something that I've been working on with government. I also recently had a meeting with 45's administration in a very private thing for bipartisan policy where we were discussing that. And the 2 points that I'm going to share is we actually have to focus more on the government, which is why I'm really excited about the commissioner position I have, because the argument that I provided is that lack of access to tech is a civil rights issue. And why is it a civil rights issue? I went toe-to-toe with these, people. And so my point was, if everybody is entitled to equal access and to equality within the country, and we have a situation where these tech companies are not providing equal access, similar to affirmative action and how they had to come up with affirmative action, it is then the responsibility of the government to ensure that we have equal access to this capital. So while we're so busy focused on the tech companies, we also need to focus on, this is what I was gonna say earlier, and you would love this, we also really need to focus on the legislation and the elections and really looking at who is for expanding access to capital and making sure we're putting those people in office, because unless we really lean on the public-private partnerships, the tech companies are going to continue to do what they do because they have no reason not to. And then I was, for real, I'm telling y'all, this meeting was 1 hour before the State of the Union. This was a real meeting. And so, secondly, I would also say, I'm gonna get extra real right now. I've managed to be peaceful throughout this panel, but the National Urban League, NAACP, and all these other black nonprofit organizations need to do a better job of supporting high-profile tech companies as well. And I'm gonna just give a personal example. Why isn't my financial literacy throughout the different empowerment centers? Like, I get called in for various different meetings, various different organizations. There was one in DC that called me in recently, and they're using Mana. National Urban League is using Everify. So it's like, these people ask me to come have notes, be on panels, and all these different type of things, but when it comes to the actual contracts for the financial literacy, they're still supporting our counterparts, even though mine's is best in the world. So it don't make sense to me. So we have to do a better job of supporting each other behind closed doors and publicly.
Word. Can I respond quickly too?
Quick. I want to get more
I'll
questions
do it
in.
real quick. I know I don't want this. It's for y'all to ask us questions, but I just want to first of all say, you said TJ was your name? First of all, thank you for leading, one, right? Because you said you were the only one in Ohio, and I've been to Ohio several times, and I've helped start the Ohio Student Association here. So I realize and recognize not only is this work challenging for folks who do tech, but it's also challenging across the board when we talk about like the progressive movement, that there's a lot of implicit bias, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of prejudice that still takes place in all of our workplaces that we need to continue to talk about. And you talking about digging deeper is where we start that work at, right? And that it's across the board, not just in the tech industry. So I wanted to first applaud and thank you for your bravery and for your leadership here in Ohio, but also for making sure that you hold us accountable in that question. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's go to the brother over here.
Thank you. This was a fantastic panel. I appreciate your insights. So I'm here on behalf of the investment consultancy based in Manhattan. We have about $40 billion in assets under advisement. A couple of billion of that is with diverse and emerging managers, actually led by my colleague that's sitting right here. And diverse and emerging is another, it's a phrase for people of color, black people, women. And we define that as 51% ownership. So if you're coming to invest assets, we want to know who owns the firm. So ownership, 51% is considered diverse. So Dr. Pinkett, Pratt, I do have a question.
06, right there.
And I'd like
Don't get me started.
I'd like your response to having, a PhD. I think I'd like to get your insight on this as well. So how would you respond to, or one of the observations I've made, to the viewpoint that the economic imperative has not been made yet? There's a question mark there, and I think you were trying to unpack Brandon's point about the economic imperative, meaning that a lot of people in Silicon Valley, they don't see the counterfactual for investing in diverse and emerging diverse companies. So for example, where was the LinkedIn that we missed out on? They just have small networks just like we do. I only know certain people, and this case that's being made that, hey, investing in diversity is going to make you a lot of money. Give me an example of that. Like, where is it? Well, it's essentially almost a nice to do. But the reason why Chase hires Latino bankers in the Bronx, it's not a nice to do. There's a business case for that. They want to be able to see someone that speaks their language and they can grow assets, and engage with the customer better. There is a business case for that. And unless the asset owner says so, or that business case is effectively made, and we know that there's a lot of talent, but those entrepreneurs becoming successful enough so people to say, oh my gosh, I missed out on Uber, I missed out on a Lyft. I think that those will get those dollars there quite fast. Now, to wait for companies to make mistakes, that's not a strategy. What if they don't make mistakes? And a McKinsey study, there are a lot of other studies that say diversity is okay, but who's losing money by not being diverse? Not, clearly, who's losing money? I'm just kind of curious your reaction to that in terms of the economic case for diversity.
I'm going to let Brandon hit it first, and I'll follow him briefly. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, sure. I think, for example, someone who is here today, Rich Dennis, there are a lot of investors who missed out on a market opportunity with him, but there are countless other companies that have done well that people have missed out on because because they didn't have diverse founders in their network, or because they didn't have access, or say they didn't have access to those folks. Let me mention this to you. Shark Tank, we do casting calls all around the country. We're searching for more diverse entrepreneurs, not only because we want the diversity of the entrepreneurs pitching on the show to reflect the diversity of the audience, but also because the Sharks have come to us and said that diverse teams perform better. In fact, Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, has said that his best performing startups are led by women. And so it's not only a moral thing, it's not only a nice to do, it's not only a good thing, it's something that investors are looking for, or at least the investors that we work with on the show are looking for. And I think the more diverse the country gets, and the farther removed from the traditional metrics that VCs and that other investment entities have used to make investments, the farther removed we are from that, the more we'll see people missing out on opportunity because they haven't been investing in diverse founders. And again, I can't say this enough, thanks to President Obama, it's not a get-rich-quick thing at all, and all investments have risk. However, you taking $50 of your own money, going to an equity crowdfunding platform, putting together an investment strategy and treating that $50 like it's $500 or like it's $5,000 or like it's $50,000, and learning how to invest will certainly set us up, I think, one, to see more of ourselves as investors, and potentially set us up for opportunities to build wealth once we have more of it. You get Angel's app and get your finances in order, take your $50 and start building. Who knows where you can get to in terms of wealth creation. But two, it'll provide more funding for those diverse startups that we need. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to give a brief response. We can keep the panel moving. I'll just say this. I've been a tech entrepreneur for 3 decades now. And I believe that the business case, and you mentioned it, the business case has been made. There's enough studies, there's enough research, there's enough out there that if you don't believe it, you're not going to believe it. I think the best way to make the business case to a company or a corporation as to what is the value of diversity is you do it well and put them out of business. Show them what it looks like to leverage diversity, to harness it, to make money off diversity, and they'll learn the hard way. Ask the taxi industry what they learned about Uber. Ask Circuit City what they learned from Best Buy. Ask Blockbuster what they learned from Netflix. They'll be like, hey, we learned a really tough lesson, and now you're out of business, dude. So what we do at my firm is we try to be the best we can at leveraging it and putting folk out of business so they can go and then come back to us for what they used to do, and we make money off them again. That's how we get it. That's how we get it. But I'm the moderator, not the speaker. So let's get back to the panel. Let's go to another question. Who's next? Over here? Yes, right over there. Let's get the next question.
Cool. Hi, my name is Daryl Sepway. I'm the National Urban League Young Professionals IT Chair. I live in Jersey, work in New York, but I see the problem happening in both states. There's a lot of STEM organizations, let's take New York, for example, that are in Manhattan. That's where the money's at, some of the best teachers, but the kids, the youth who need the most help are in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Queens. And the professors, the money isn't going out there. And some of those kids are not traveling to the center of Manhattan or applying, getting accepted into these programs. So my question is, how do we solve the problem where the people who need the most help and they're so smart don't have access to these resources and can benefit from the money?
Thank you, brother, for that question. The first thing I'll say is, which is hopefully obvious, is that redistricting and gerrymandering are a part of those conversations and those questions, right? When we talk about what areas that are low income get the most resources and get the most money, that is determined either by city council, by the mayor, by the governor, by the president, by the Department of Education, et cetera, we have to be able to make sure that we're counted. And right now, we have to make sure that next year we fill out the census so that when we talk about I'll say it again, we have to fill out the census so that they can count us, because our people are not getting counted, which is part of the reason. A lot of it's racism, but part of the reason, right? Part of the reason where we can fix this is that we can make sure that we're counted, so that when we show up for elections and we vote the people in office who serve our communities, that resources actually get funded there. Right now, I have a lot of friends who are from Brooklyn. The homie, my son, who's here walking around somewhere, he's from the Bronx. Yeah, so when we talk about our communities, especially there, they're not getting the resources because they're not getting counted, because we allow them to ignore us, because we're not counting ourselves in the census, and because we're not showing up, right? So if we continue to show up and they can fund our services and they can fund our students, right now, and I was a union organizer for teachers for both AFT and the National Education Association. I did labor union organizing for 5 years. The highest paid teachers right now in the country are in New York. The poorest paid teachers in this country are in Jackson, Mississippi. And they get paid less than half what the teachers get in New York. Now, granted, we talk about housing and cost of living, et cetera, but that's not okay, right? When we talk about the priorities, it's strategic racism, it's structural racism, but we have to make sure that we're showing up and getting counted. So I'll let somebody else answer, but I wanted to make sure I said that.
Yeah, I think going back to the point about awareness, I think, as Black people and people that are underestimated, we're very good at creating media, we're very good at consuming media. I think entertainment is one of the greatest exports in America, but if you aren't aware of what's going on, there's a problem. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't solve it. So Ida Lane, who runs techactivist.org over there, she talks a lot about a quote by Malcolm X where he says that media is the most powerful entity in the world. And if you think about that, Black Panthers had a magazine, Malcolm X had Muhammad Speaks, all these different things. So that's part of the reason why we started with that in the beginning with the community building. But you also have to show and prove through action and deeds. And even if you place 5 people into one of these tech companies, you could literally increase percentages by double digits. And going back to what we were talking about, organizing is really not that hard. If I place one person to a job and I instill the mindset to help somebody after you get there, that's 2 people right there, right? It really is not very difficult to do that. I actually did something with Ruben Diaz in the Bronx, with the Bronx Tech Summit, to start talking about these types of things. But going back to the events, you can't just have an event talking about something with no follow-up. Same thing with sales, same thing with the first date. If there's no follow-up, it doesn't lead to nothing, right? So anyway, I think it starts with awareness, showing them the path with action items and follow-up, and then reflection on what goes well. And I'll borrow this from another panel that I was at, where he said the skills are the baseline, right? But then it goes to the assets, where you have your tribe, your housing, your transportation, things like that. But then it goes to the mindset, and just how do you thrive in this environment? How do you level up? How do you instill a lifelong learning and pass it down to other people, and not just operate as individuals, but as a collective, because that's where the power is, and that's how you shut things down.
All right. And
Or
really
build things
level
up.
Really quickly, question back to you is, what are you doing to measure and memorialize the demand that you're seeing from areas that are under-resourced? So very, very quickly, we at Values Partnerships partner with Google, and we run a program called Connected Churches, where we do free technology training for African American, Latinx students at churches all around the country. Prior to several years ago, Google, like many tech companies, didn't do anything with people of faith at all. They didn't do churches, mosques, synagogues, anybody. But we said these are undervalued resources, houses of worship that are in communities all across the nation and certainly all across the world. We started out by doing surveys at church conferences and just saying, how are you using technology? And if we were to put together a program Would you use it? Got thousands of responses, took that to them, got resources to put together a toolkit, a PDF form toolkit, and also got authorization to go around the country and start doing training classes, so teaching students how to use 13 Google and non-Google tech platforms. After that success, we got literally thousands of requests to go to churches around the country and do these trainings, outstripped capacity, so we took those numbers back to Google and said, hey, we don't have enough capacity, stop, just a second, and we're able to get authorization to build a digital toolkit. And so now we have a website at connectedchurches.co that anybody around the country, big city, small town, can go to get the resources they need to learn how to use technology. So I suggest you measure and memorialize the demand that you're seeing, and then take it to folks that have resources, and I'm happy to help you do it.
Thank you.
That was quick. I'm fighting for you, my sister. Question is yours.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Reddy. I'm a researcher at Everytown for Gun Safety in New York City. This is a really great panel. I'm learning a lot, and I'm so happy that I'm here, actually. The reason why I need to ask this question, it's a really broad question, and I don't think we can answer it in one panel or in one workshop. It's about gun violence and the role of technology, and how can you talked about access to power, access to technology, right? So this is about human rights issue. This is about racial justice. And there are a lot of intersections that we need to look at when we talk about gun violence in general. And I am sure a lot of you know that gun violence in this country disproportionately affects Black Americans. Actually, Black Americans are 10 times more likely to be shot and killed by homicide than white Americans. I guess my question is, how can organizations like National Urban League, NAACP, and other organizations and you leaders who are actually moving the needle to really bridge the racial gap in technology, really talk to young people to use technology to our own advantage and at least help or address this racial issue?
So I'm going to give 2 quick responses. Thank you for your question. So our company, Wealthy Life, is the only company in the country that is partnered with the Department of Health and Human Services for returning citizens. And so we basically focus on gun violence because we believe that gun violence actually stems from a lack of financial literacy. We believe that increased financial literacy will reduce recidivism. And so we are the first and last stop before jail for adults as well as at-risk students. And so they send us to them, they send them to us to train them on financial literacy, to prevent them from going to jail as a last stop, as well as when they come home, we train them on financial literacy so that they can actually have skills that they can use and not have to return to the gun violence and return to the streets. Secondly, I'm also going to plug my good friend Trevor Brooks. He has an app called Gun Bail. And he did 19 years in prison for committing a murder, came home, created this app, and basically it allows you to be able to exchange guns for bail money. It's going really well. He's rolled it out in Baltimore and in St. Louis, and so I would encourage everybody to look into Gun Bail and spread that message as well.
Allison, you got
it. Thank you so much for the question. I think I want to talk a little bit about, at Code 2040, we have something called the Fellows Program. And that's where we match, or we facilitate Black and Latinx computer science majors with internships at tech companies around the country, right? And they spend a summer interning at these companies as any other intern would, and they participate in our programming and curriculum that focuses on a lot of things really around, for example, navigating tech, dealing with imposter syndrome in tech, those sorts of things, and how to become an advocate for racial equity in tech as well. And the reason why I'm calling that out is because every summer we do have a demo day where they reveal the products they've been working on all summer. And all of these products have a social justice lens to them. Because the goal is really, yes, we want people to have access to tech because access to tech is access to power. And we want folks to reimagine what it means to create products that truly serve people. And sometimes it can be a matter of something really straightforward, something that, obviously is really rooted in community and addressing community needs. need, and it can be around, thinking what are the kind of policies that you want to create around how your product is used, right? Because what we have in tech now is a lot of folks saying, I'm just a neutral platform. I don't know anything about what's going on, and that's not acceptable, right? And so it's building the product and it's creating policy around the product so that it doesn't harm us, right? And it actually supports us and is built by us, and we have a say in how it's used.
I need quick.
It'll be super
I got
fast.
3 more questions.
I think if you want to address social justice, you have to like using technology, you really got to understand political education. You got to understand cybersecurity. You got to understand data. You got to understand privacy. And I highly encourage you to check out techactivist.org, because they talk deeply about all those things and talk a lot about like how would Malcolm X or organizers in general, we talked about this backstage, how would they operate if they had tech skills today? And if you think about that, I'll just stop there since we'll keep it short.
You are one of my favorite moderators. You are on point. I just want to let you know that. Okay, so really quickly, I just got to say this because my second day at my new job at the NAACP was the day that the Parkland shooting took place, the mass school shooting took place. And I reached out to every town because I had to make sure that black students, especially at Parkland, but also in the NAACP, were able to take up space at a march and a conversation that we've been talking about for a very long time, but that the media started paying attention to because some white kids was killed. So I just wanted to thank you, not you personally, but your organization, of course, every town, because partnerships are really important.
All right, let's go over there. Thank you. Got you, sister. You're next.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Bass Cooper. I wear a number of hats with the Urban League. I'm a new member of the Guild, and I'm also an entrepreneur in tech. I know that it is important to have partners. I've been in this company for 3 years. I'm trying to scale, and I can't scale unless I have partners. So I am here asking for the black tech community's help in furthering the visions that I have for my community in the aging space. I've been a member of Aging 2.0 for the last 4 years, but I haven't had traction. So I can only come to a community where I know we will all benefit from technological advances that benefit all of our aging seniors.
So let me help us to help you. Was there a panelist whose background you looked into?
Well, I can tell you real quick, girl, in 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, that you wanted to connect with, or is there something you want to tell this audience that you're looking for that they can find you?
Yes, they can find me at silversedans.com is my website, and I have cards here that I'm more than willing to hand out.
And what kind of help are you looking for? What kind of help are you looking for?
I need partners. I need a CTO who's willing to look at my business plan and help it take off.
Got it.
And I'm looking for a COO. So I can go out and go to people like that young man who's first in the row and make my pitch.
All right, all right.
Can I say one thing?
I look forward to hearing it.
And I'm happy to help as well. I worked in the senior care space before starting my own company. It's called Honor. So check out Honor. We connect the caregivers with seniors and their families, and we work with transportation for seniors. So check them out, and I'm happy to connect you to whoever over there.
Awesome. All right. Next question, right there.
My name is Eduardo Giddy. I happen to work for the United States Census Bureau.
Come on.
We are the data,
represent.
We are the data people of the world.
Look at that.
And I just want to say, number one, thank you. Thank you, NAACP too.
National Urban League.
Both. You can just thank both.
We love you too, but make sure you know where you at.
Thank you, National Urban League, for getting this group of exquisite, intelligent African Americans, male and female, young, to show us. And I just want to, I'm going to talk to each one of you personally, hopefully, but thank you, and I hope that we take full advantage of all that these folks have to offer, because it's a whole lot.
Thank you so much for your leadership, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next question. Thank you, sir.
They asking y'all, they keep pushing y'all because the cameras need to get your face on the screen for people who are watching on the live stream.
All right, my name is Jermichael McCoy. I am president of the Urban League Greater Richmond Young Professionals. My question is, in the The rise in cryptocurrencies in terms of evaluations, but also assets, can you talk about that as a vehicle for economic empowerment within our community, along with education in terms of the literacy space and finance? Thanks.
So this is the last question, and whoever responds, or maybe it's you, for those who don't know what cryptocurrency is, let's just make sure we're all on the same page.
Don't waste your time with cryptocurrency.
No, we got to clarify what it is, though, first. Some folks don't know what it is.
I think
Either one.
I think cryptocurrency is a complicated subject to unpack in a short answer. I would say when it comes to the cryptocurrency space and blockchain, to really study decentralization. To your point, like cryptocurrency is very speculative. It's like worse than angel investing. There is high upside because there's a extreme amount of high risk. And we were actually early in Bitcoin because of Atlanta, and BitPay was there. But decentralization is important to study because if that plays out, the current power structures will shift to models where people are exchanging value from a systemic perspective versus a centralized system, which it is right now. So I would just encourage people to study that first versus just throwing their money at Bitcoin. We actually have a podcast with Gary Vaynerchuk where he says the same thing that she just said, talking about crypto and how it's actually putting a lot of people in debt. So be careful.
I'm going to just say this, point blank period. Leave cryptocurrency alone. I'm one of the authors of the Member Regulation Handbook. I'm a founding employee of FINRA. Long story short, you got some guy in the hood running around selling Chuck E. Cheese coins, calling them Bitcoin. Decentralization will never happen because there will always have to be somebody that has to regulate that. Who's going to put the person in jail that's selling Bitcoins or Chuck E. Cheese coins? It has to be the SEC. So somebody will always try to defraud the system. Will we maybe have a digital currency? Will we maybe operate off a blockchain? Yes. But are we going to proceed with the current Bitcoin and the coins that are currently in existence? No. Now, a real way to make money, I'm going to leave y'all with this gem, is y'all said that everybody has to do 15% for CBEs in the state of Ohio. So what you do, young lady, for your contracts, when you're trying to get your contracts off the ground, you go on down to the Department of State and Local Business Development. They have a book called it's either called the Business Development Program or the Enterprise Book, whatever it's called in the state of Ohio. They list out all of the money that is spent across all of the agencies across the entire government. They also break out how much money is supposed to be dedicated to the CBEs, okay? For the most part, because of a lot of racism going around the country, the CBE requirement usually doesn't get filled. In DC, we have a 50% quota. So what you do is you go and you look and you see who did not use their CBE quota. Then you narrow that down to who did not spend more than 50% of their CBE quota. Then you find out who is in charge of the contracts for those particular agencies within the CBE. Then you conveniently find yourself at a networking event with that person. And you meet that person, you befriend that person, then you keep an alert on when the contracts are coming out. You apply to every single contract that's coming out, and you send that project manager an email, and that's how you get your contracts.
Mic drop. That's it.
All
right. Well, look, unfortunately, folks, we are out of time. This has been an incredible panel. Let me just see if I can summarize some of what we've heard from today. From Brandon Andrews, what I took from you, Brandon, is that there's an untapped opportunity for us to invest in our own businesses, that it could be as little as $10 that we could put in through...
Exactly, equity crowdfunding, and for those of you that are on Twitter, I used the Save Our Cities hashtag to send out an article that I wrote on equity crowdfunding that explains the history, thanks Obama again, and also explains how you can do it whenever you're ready.
And Wealthy Life just opened up half of our money, $500,000, with equity crowdfunding as well. It's called a 506C for anybody that wants to look it up. And so I know I previously said a minimum of $50,000, but if you're interested in investing, we have now lowered it for the equity crowdfunding. Email us at info@getwealthylife.com. We've quietly raised about $200,000 off of it recently, and we plan on doing more.
Excellent, excellent. Angel, thank you for your comments on risking your job, putting it all on the line. Tiffany.
Be a Trojan horse. Watch the TED Talk to get the full version.
Tiffany, the organizer in you, tells us to get out and vote and make sure that we make a difference in this midterm election and in all elections. Ruben, for all of what you're doing on the front lines to break startups, break our people into startups and into markets where we have been underrepresented. We appreciate you. Allison, I love what you said about access to tech is access to power. That will stay with me. I'm going to tweet that in a moment. And then, Will, we need a black Mark Zuckerberg. And in fact, we already have it. We already have it. We just need to know who they are, right?
It's Angel
That's
Rich,
right, that's
niggas.
right.
Like, I'm
Look.
sitting right here.
All right, so to close this out, please do not forget the National Urban League Experience and Expo. You can look for tech employment
I purposely used
opportunities
that word.
at the Career and Networking Fair. For a complete breakdown of all activities, please refer to the National Urban League mobile app where you can find information on the conference. Please join me in thanking Brandon Andrews, Angel Rich, Tiffany, Dena Loftin, Ruben Harris, Allison Jones, and Will Lucas for a fantastic panel on Control, Alt, Delete. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and we'll see you tonight at the gala. God bless you, and take care.
Diamonds in my rings, a Riviera chateau, and a lot of other things. And I'm blue, so blue am I. Lots of ready money in 7 different banks. I counted up this morning, it's about 1 million francs. And I'm blue, so blue, and I know why. I've got Harlem on my mind, and I'm longing to be low down